Well, thanks, everybody. There it is. This meeting is being recorded. Got it. Um, Welcome, everybody. I'm Clare McCarthy. I host a podcast and run a company called Transcat. And Transcat is my attempt to create a safe space for respectful conversations about transgender issues. It has, over time, also become a place for queer people to just come tell their stories. Tonight's presentation is called The False Binary. And I am aware that by choosing the word false, I'm being divisive. If somebody were to come up to me and say, this thing that you believe in, it's false, I would get defensive. I would push back. I would try to make an argument. Um, and I guess that's in my thinking. I don't want this presentation to be divisive. I want you to come away with a better understanding. I want you to come away as someone who would be able to speak up in the communities you're in, with family, with friends. When you hear misinformation being spread, you can step in and say, well, hold on a minute there. I've divided this up into 4 segments. Originally, this presentation is a 2-hour presentation, and I've done my best to squish it into the time frame. So forgive me if I go fast in parts. We're going to take a look at 4, as I say, 4 things here. Social constructs. Then we're going to talk about what gender is, the nature of complex systems, and how you go about talking about them, and then we'll stop at the end for Q&As. So if you have questions, hang on to them. Actually, if as we're going through, a question occurs to you, why don't you put it in the chat so that Rachel can moderate at the end of the presentation. Any questions, anything before I start rolling through here? All right, well then again, welcome, and let's do this. As I say, I'd like you to come away with a better understanding, and I would like you to be able to be a voice of reason in this conversation that the culture is having, because there are way too many people shouting and saying things that are just blatantly untrue. So let's begin with the term social construct. A social construct is something that is not in and of itself true. It is not something that has to be that way, but we decide to go along with it. So, for example, here are some examples of social constructs. Money is a social construct. It's really just a piece of paper or a piece of metal. It doesn't mean anything until we all agree that it means something. $1 equals this in terms of services or goods. Race is a social construct. The notion that people with different skin tones, which, newsflash, we all have different skin tones, somehow comprises something real, that is not inherently true. Countries, when you were a kid and they gave you that map to color in school, you had these nice borders on all the countries. Well, that doesn't actually exist. When you cross from one country into the other, you don't have those nice dotted line square things. So that, again, doesn't have to be that way, doesn't have to be in that spot. And likewise, gender is a social construct. More on that in a bit. Let me give you a couple of examples of why and how we do this as a culture. Some social constructs are just blatantly false, and yet we buy into them. I don't want to ruin anyone's evening, but there is no jolly fat man who lives in an uninhabitable part of the world, flies on reindeer, and delivers presents. But we buy into that as a culture for certain reasons, right? For conformity, to make sure our kids aren't excluded from this myth. But we know it isn't true. Some myths are partially true. Some social constructs are at least partially true. If you want to propose to somebody, You had better be prepared to spend a certain amount of money on an engagement ring. Because if you don't, then all sorts of conclusions are drawn from that. You don't love the person enough to spend the money. You don't make enough money to be a decent spouse. And so this this idea that in order to get married to someone, you have to buy an expensive ring and you have to spend within this amount of your annual budget on it. It doesn't have to be that way. Young people who are getting married for the first time could easily take that money and put it towards a house. Or if they're thinking about having kids, they could put it towards their kids' education. Maybe they shouldn't be spending it on a symbol instead of something real. Sometimes social constructs are what I call aspirationally true. We want, as a society, we want what's best for our kids. And we believe that the public education system will provide the benefits that these kids need. That isn't necessarily so. Public education in America right now is still very much geared to the goals of the industrial age. Show up on time, do what you're told, follow the rules, because that's what you needed to do when the end result was you're going to work in a factory or you're going to work for a large company and they're going to tell you what to do. And the reality is that our economy now is geared more and needs more creative thinkers, people who are able to apply skills that don't necessarily mean following the rules and showing up in a certain place at a certain time. We need entrepreneurs, we need creative thinkers. And so the belief that education, and in particular a college education, is the path to success isn't necessarily true. For a lot of college students, a college degree these days just means you're not going to be able to buy a home until you're well into your 40s or 50s, if then. So there, at least the social construct, the belief that education will help you in the long run, at least it's something that we hope is true, even when it isn't. The thing about these social constructs is that as soon as enough people buy into them, as soon as enough people say, yeah, I'll go along with that, then they create a shorthand. And so social constructs within your culture, within your society, start to determine what is beautiful, what is smart, what's important, what's funny, what's strong, all of these things. And it becomes sort of a given that, yeah, this is what this culture thinks intelligence is or beauty is. But these social constructs leave out you. They skip over the fact that all of these things are subjective. What is beautiful to you? What does strong mean to you? In the 80s, a philosopher named Judith Butler wrote a book called Gender Trouble. And we're going to, for the most part, leave gender for the second portion, but let me just refer to this for now. She laid out the fact that people like to conform to expectations. It gives them certain benefits that are worth buying into these expectations. And enough people in the society, if they start seeing cisgender, heterosexual people as normal, i.e., everybody is presumed to be heterosexual until they're proven otherwise, then that is normal. Even though that's just a social construct, that is not inherently true. And if you accept that, if you accept that this group of people is normal, then anything that deviates from that, i.e., people like me, are abnormal. Judith Butler uses the word performative to describe gender. And that doesn't mean it's fake, but it means gender only exists in the doing. So if you do the things that society say are specific to a gender, then you're doing it right. And if you don't, then that creates cognitive dissonance. Her end point is that if you are willing to rethink and reassess these social constructs, you will end up with a better society. Come back to gender in a bit. Why would people want to do this? Same reason people would want to do anything, to make money and to have power. Power comes into play when people decide they are the gatekeepers for what is and is not acceptable, even if it's not inherently true. Somebody who will tell you, you can't wear that, you can't behave that way, you can't talk like that, you can't be like that. One of the greatest examples of this is the beauty industry. Billions of dollars per year on mascara, on hair products, on clothing. So they are promoting this idea that here, what you're looking at right now, here is what a beautiful woman looks like. You don't fit that model? You don't look like that? That's okay. We've got a product we can sell you to help you get closer to that social construct. Let me end the first section. Let me end the first section with a little clip about applying these things we've talked about to feminine beauty.
The French existentialist writer Simone de Beauvoir famously declares in her book The Second Sex that a woman isn't born a woman. Rather, she becomes one. She means by this that there is no way women have to be, no given femininity, no ideal to which all women should conform. There's biology, of course, and as a result, women's experiences tend to be very different from men's. But what it is to be a woman is, she believes, socially constructed, and largely by males at that. It is through other people's expectations and assumptions that a woman becomes feminine. Women, de Beauvoir argues, are expected to strive after beauty, a beauty that has been defined by men's view of what they would like women to be, a view that often denies their capacity for action and thought. There have been different ideals of feminine beauty at different times and different places, but the constant throughout history is that women have been encouraged to be passive objects, their bodies emphasized and displayed. Women are supposed to use artifice to make themselves ornamental, or, as de Beauvoir saw it, disguise more animal aspects of their body which men found unacceptable. Women's clothes and shoes frequently constrain their movement. Their beauty regimes take over their lives and drain their finances. They're controlled by other people's visions of what they should look like and how they should live. For young women in particular, the pressure to become an object to the male gaze, to be conventionally beautiful, to diet, to worry about makeup and jewelry, is intense. But it is still, according to de Beauvoir, resistible. True to her existentialism, she believes that women are fundamentally free to reject male stereotypes of beauty and sexual attractiveness, and to become more equal as a result.
I bring this up because of a term that is used in transgender circles, and that is passing, where you are able to live your life in the gender you want to be in without people being able to tell. I will never pass. I don't even come close to the accepted standard of beauty for women in this country. And that's something that trans people have to deal with every day. Cis women do too, but there are more complications for trans women. So what do we learn about social constructs? Well, for starters, they are not intrinsically true. Social constructs do benefit somebody, usually in terms of money or power, and that somebody probably isn't you. We accept these constructs either wholeheartedly or just kind of passively going along with them because we see some benefit for ourselves. With the Santa Claus example, for example, you might decide that you don't want your kid to be the only one who isn't expecting gifts on the 25th. Excuse me. And here's the thing. We, either as individuals or as a group, we can reject, question, change, modify, ignore social constructs anytime we see fit. You are not obliged to follow them. You might not end up being the most popular person in your neighborhood, but you have that option. All right, gender. Let's talk gender. What is it? Is it chromosomes? Yeah, sure. Is it hormones? Yep. I, like a number of menopausal and postmenopausal women, I put on estrogen patches twice a week because my body doesn't produce estrogen on its own. Is gender your primary sex characteristics? Whether you have a vagina or a penis and testicles, is that what determines it? Certainly part of it. Or I'm going to argue this is more important. Is it secondary sex characteristics? Because I'm gonna put out there the odds that when you fall in love with somebody, when you are attracted to someone physically, it is probably not to their primary sex characteristics. It is probably whether they have, short hair or long hair, facial hair or clean shaven, boobs and butt versus biceps and ripped chest muscles. That's what we fall in love with. The hair, the face, the voice, which again, I don't have. Or is gender social roles, which we know change over time and from culture to culture. What is expected of a female person right now in 2023 is not what was expected of a female person in the 1950s or in 1776. So it's all of these things. Plus, it's psychological and emotional. And we have decided, in addition, you'll notice the color here with the blue and the pink, but it's these personality traits that we have ascribed to masculine people or feminine people. So if you are logical and assertive and goal driven, then you are masculine. But if you're caring and nurturing and understanding, then you're exhibiting feminine traits. That's arbitrary. We could think of any number of people who are important in our lives, either personally or in terms of the culture, who defy those stereotypes. Now, I was growing up late teens, early 20s in the 1980s. And in the 1980s, the culture went through a real shift in how it depicted femininity and masculinity. In the 80s, it was no longer enough to be Robert Redford, Steve McQueen, Paul Newman, and have that be the image of masculinity. Suddenly, the masculine stars of stage and screen were all on steroids. They were ripped and they were grim and gritty and liked killing people. And likewise, in the 80s, when MTV started up, there was a depiction of women that was objectifying and commodifying their bodies. And so you found people selling records, selling music based on butts and boobs. These are hyper masculine and hyper feminine. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was the 80s that came up with the term of supermodel, as if that were something to strive for. And as I say, we can all think of people I'm thinking of my maternal grandfather at the moment, who was a great storyteller and whom I felt loved me when I was a kid. We can think of people who defy those stereotypes, but are no less masculine or feminine. Bella Abzug was all of those things that are listed under the masculine list there, but she wasn't a man. And Mr. Rogers was caring and nurturing. I remember when the Gulf War started and he came on TV at night and did a special for kids explaining, okay, I can understand where you might be really scared right now, particularly if your folks are in the service. And he spent whatever it was, a half hour, an hour, reassuring kids, being understanding and sensitive, things that are not generally associated with men, with the masculine. Here's how gender works. We've got all of these things that go into it, all of these different layers, very complicated stuff. And yet, here's the way it actually works. You are born, doctor slaps you on the bum to make sure you're breathing, and then takes a look between your legs. And that doctor makes an assignment. And for some reason, the doctor is only choosing between two answers. You are either male or female. And in the trans world, in the study of gender, they use the acronyms AMAB and AFAB, assigned male at birth, assigned female at birth. I was assigned male at birth. Now, if you go through your life and you get through your childhood and your adolescence and into your adulthood, and you don't ever think about this assignment that got made for you, congratulations. That is wonderful. I am so happy for you. The odds are pretty good that if that is you, you're cisgender. If, however, that one person's declaration of who you are causes you crippling distress and anxiety as you go through your childhood and your adolescence and into your adulthood, you might be transgender. That's what I experienced growing up. Here's the way I suggest you think about this gender system. For the longest time, I had this as my understanding of how electric lights work in the house. The lights are on, the lights are off. It's bedtime, you turn the lights off. Morning, and I don't want to get out of bed to go to school, mom would come in and turn the lights on and tell me to get up and get dressed. And that's how electric lighting worked, because that's all we knew about it until it wasn't. Until we realized that it's not a binary. It doesn't have to just be on and off, a 1 or a 0. We've got all these options in between. You got a date coming over? Let's put the lights on dim. You're trying to study? Let's put them up on high. We have options. We are not restrained by a false binary. All right, I'm going back for a second. I also felt the same way about the tub, where we used to have the two knobs and you had to balance the temperature of the water, which I hated. I always got it wrong until they combined it. And now you just turn on the water flow and adjust it in one instead of two. This is a learning tool developed by the Trevor Project, which if you're not familiar with, when we're done, please go check out the Trevor Project. They save lives. And they suggest 5 axes for you to consider when you're discussing your gender, or even when you're just thinking about it. What is your biological sex, i.e., what did the doctor declare you were at birth? Gender identity is how you feel on the inside. Gender expression is how you present to other people. What do you wear when you go to work? What do you wear when you go to Stop and Shop? Do you wear makeup? Do you not wear makeup? Gender presentation is the other side of the coin. When that clerk in Stop and Shop is checking you out at the register, What do they think about you? How do they perceive you? And then, even though gender and sexual orientation are two entirely separate things, everything is connected. And so, sexual orientation, who are you romantically attracted to? Who are you sexually attracted to? That's part of it as well. And it sort of creates this series of basic questions over who am I? How do I move through the world? How do I carry myself? How do other people perceive me? And it changes over time, right? When I was born, I was declared male. And even though well before I turned 10, I identified as a woman, just stuck in a really crappy body for a woman. Uh, and so my gender expression was as masculine as I could make it. My gender presentation was as masculine as I could make it. And my sexual orientation was that I was attracted to women. I will say this much about living in a male body: it's not ambiguous about who it's sexually attracted to. So, in that, and that was confusing for me. How can you feel like a woman but be attracted to women? What's going on? There must be something wrong with you. So then, gender. Oh, sorry. And I forgot there was that slide there. Uh, and it's not until you are trans, it's not until you go through life experiencing extreme distress every time you run across one of these gendered parts of life that you realize everything in this life has been gendered arbitrarily. Before you're born, they throw a party and fill cupcakes with frosting depending on what gender they think you are. They give you toys, they give you a uniform at school that says conform, do this, wear this. You start playing sports. You go to the restroom and you have to make a binary decision. And then the most insidious part is they start selling you products that have no reason to be gendered. Men's and women's earplugs, hairbrushes. It's the exact same hairbrush. They just made one blue and one pink. Towels. My towel doesn't care what gender I am. And guns. They sell guns for men over here and guns for women over there. This is arbitrary and it's somebody making money off it. Well, when you're trans, every single one of these things makes you feel like I don't belong here. If all of these things are gendered, I must be wrong. There must be something wrong with me. Actually, I'm going to try the earplug thing. I'm going to buy one of each and see if one works better than the other. I don't know. The late, great Leonard Cohen said, the dealer'd have you thinking that it's either black or white. Thank God it's not that simple. Thanks, Leonard. So in terms of gender, here's what we learned. Gender identity comprises both the biological, your chromosomes, your hormones, your actual physical body parts, and social components. Lots and lots of social components. All of the social components are social constructs. They are all arbitrary. Biological components, which you would think would be pretty hardwired and unchangeable, actually vary and change over time. My body when I was 2 was not my body when I was 18, and it is not my body now at 60. That changes over time. There's weight gain, weight loss, there's all sorts of things that your body is changing all the time. Enforcing this false binary, insisting that that is true, even when it's not, benefits somebody, and you probably see it coming. That somebody probably isn't you. Let me grab a sip here. Hang on. I don't know if you've ever wondered why some systems are so hard to predict. the weather, right? When I was a teacher, I used to say all the time, if I could get paid for being wrong 60% of the time, that would be a good job. You would never get to keep your job if you were a teacher and you were wrong 60% of the time. But these guys are, or the economy, right? There are people who have spent decades of their lives immersed in the economy, studying the economy, and you listen to them and they're like, well, we think this might happen. We don't really know. We hope. We're aspirational about this. Why? I hope if we do this, then this will happen, but we don't know. Or raising a child. At this point, how long have we been raising children? You would think we would have it down to a science where you could say, you do this, 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 and this, and here's the outcome for your kid. And we know that's not true. We know that never happens. This is why. In school, if you took geometry, you were probably studying, whoa, sorry about that. You were probably studying Euclidean geometry. That is to say, the geometry put forward by the Greek scholar Euclid. Here's the thing they didn't tell you in high school. Euclidean geometry is abstract. These things don't exist in the real world. There is no such thing as a perfect square, a perfect circle, a perfect triangle. They only exist in the ideal, and yet that's what we study in school. In the 80s, while Rambo was rampaging through the jungles and women were shaking themselves in front of a camera for MTV, there was a mathematician named Benoit Mandelbrot. And he looked at complex systems. And he said, as long as you only have 2 points in a system, the outcome will always be predictable. So if you're playing Pong, the only things that matter is where on the paddle the ball is going to hit and what the angle of that contact is. And that will always predictably end up on the other side at a certain point, because there are only 2, what he called attractors. But he said, anytime you add a third attractor, anytime you have something more complicated than just back and forth between 2 points, that system inevitably creates an area of unpredictability. There are things you will not be able to predict in that system. Hence, let me just go back for a second. Hence, the weather, the economy, the kids. This came to be known as chaos mathematics because of this area of unpredictability in any system that becomes complicated. And the way he asked people to visualize this was with a question. He said, what is the length of the coastline of Britain? Seems pretty straightforward. Now, I should point out that he was asking this in the 80s, so that is well before Google Maps. And yet I, since I am not a mathematician, am going to use Google Maps to see what he was talking about. Now, if I wanted to measure the coastline of Britain, probably what I would do is come up with my little, 1 inch equals X number of miles, and I would just keep plunking them down like this until I went all the way around the coastline, and then I'd add it up. And that'd be fine. That would give me the answer. But as we know from Google Maps, that only works if you have a certain perspective. As soon as you change the perspective, you start to realize that there's a lot more detail. And yeah, I could do the same thing, I suppose, but then it just keeps going. How do you measure all these irregularities? When you get to a river, do you just jump across the river, or do you have to measure along the side of it and then down the other side? And it just keeps going. The more detail, the more information you have, the more the answer changes. Until eventually The answer to Mandelbrot's question is that the coastline of Britain is either unmeasurable or it is infinite. It is infinitely long. And that's tough stuff to understand. But all he's saying is that in order to understand a complex system, you depend on your perspective and on what unit of measurement you are using. Gender is a complex system. All of the things that we were talking about before and lots more go into making up this system of what your gender is. So my question is, if it's a complex system, why are we expecting a simple answer? Nobody expects a simple answer in terms of fixing the economy. Nobody expects really that the weather is going to be entirely predictable. We get as much information as we can, and we try to learn new things all the time. Complex systems. In a complex system, things are connected and they influence each other. Measurements in a complex system depend on where you're standing and how carefully you are looking at things. If you're ignoring stuff, it's a lot easier to get a simple answer. To predict a complex system, you need to understand it fully, and yep, you probably can't. Everything in the real world is in a complex system, even if you want to pretend it's otherwise. The outcome of your child rearing cannot be ultimately predicted, even though you want it to be so much. You want what's best for your kids. I'm a former Latin teacher, pardon me. And so I ended up spending a lot more time than I actually wanted to with Marcus Tullius Cicero, who was Rome's greatest orator. My guess is that even though he made immeasurable contributions to Western culture, he seems like he would have been a really obnoxious person to be around on a personal basis, but that's beside the point. From my Cicero, I learned that the purpose of a discussion, of a conversation, is better understanding. But areas like the law and politics aren't interested in that. The goal in law and politics is win the argument. That's all that matters. It doesn't matter how you get there, win the argument. Now, rhetoric, the skill that Cicero had, possibly more than anyone in history, is the means to your victory. How are you going to win this argument? You're going to choose a rhetorical strategy and you're going to pursue it. So with the remaining 15 minutes or so, I would like to take a look at some of the rhetoric that's being used around the gender issue. Let's start here.
I talked to a student recently at one of our woke college campuses who said she's required in every class to introduce herself and to give her pronouns. Well, I'm Ted Cruz, and my pronoun is kiss my ass.
Thank you for that insight, Senator Cruz. One rhetorical strategy is to go into your argument assuming that the people, the plebs to the Romans, are uneducated and angry. So go into that argument with a catchy soundbite, kiss my ass. Appeal to emotions, not to reason, because emotion, particularly base emotions like fear and anger and jealousy, they will galvanize people much better than noble emotions like reason and caring and supporting. In order to do that, you need to know your audience's biases. Senator Cruz understood that very well. And so in just a couple of sentences, he managed to make it clear that he is anti-intellectual, those colleges and the terrible things they're doing to our kids. He is anti-woke, whatever it is that means. And he took the lessons, because rhetoric also comes into play, not just in politics and the law, but in advertising. We're surrounded by rhetoric, people who want to win the argument and have you buy their product. So identify a non-existent problem, then express outrage at it, and then offer to solve that problem with your product. Vote for me, and I will fix this problem that doesn't really exist. That's rhetoric. And it's effective. I've got to say that. That was a very effective speech he gave. It was plastered all over everywhere afterwards. Here's another.
Ridiculous. But I made the same point. The ridiculousness is the BBC teaching kids there are 100 genders. There aren't. It is absurd. Bring back Tommy Lahren, who I imagine is hyperventilating over there in America. Tommy, I mean, look, I don't see why, if it's limitless, I can't just say, I'm Piers Morgan, I'm a black lesbian. Because that is where limitless self-identity takes us. It means that male rapists can say they're women and get into female prisons. It means I can say I'm a two-spirit penguin or a black lesbian, and why can't I? Because that is where it takes you.
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Morgan. A really great rhetorical strategy, Cicero was great at this, is what we call reductio ad absurdum. You take what the opponent is saying and you take it to a ridiculous outcome. You just follow it, you jump over all the actual facts and reality, and you jump to something ridiculous, and you say, well, that's the logical outcome. This is brilliant, because for starters, it invites mocking, right? If you can make this ridiculous, if Piers Morgan can stand up and say, I'm a black lesbian, then he's mocking transgender people, non-binary people. And by doing that, you create a space. You create a space between what is actually being discussed and this absurd conclusion. And it's like prestidigitation. You get them focused over here instead of where the issue actually is. It's brilliant. It creates scorn in the audience. They learn that it's okay to make fun of these people. They're ridiculous. It also makes the argument abstract. This isn't about real people. This isn't about people who are suffering needlessly because of social constructs that don't have to be that way. It's about some abstract idea. And we defend our abstract ideas.
Medical treatments for transgender youth, things like hormone therapy, puberty blockers, and sex change operations are under scrutiny in Texas. Maggie Glenn from our Austin station explains why the state attorney general says those treatments are forms of child abuse and need to stop.
The governor basing his directive on an interpretation of the current Texas Family Code from Attorney General Ken Paxton, which states gender-affirming procedures can cause, quote, mental or emotional injury to a child. Now, DFPS is instructed to investigate the administration of puberty-blocking drugs, doses of testosterone or estrogen, and reassignment surgeries for kids. Doctors for Care, a nonprofit here in Texas, says it's not aware of any minor in Texas under the age of 18 who have received gender reassignment surgery.
That's because there aren't any. This is something that that the governor, like Piers Morgan, like Senator Cruz, has made up out of whole cloth. This is another brilliant rhetorical strategy. You reframe the argument. And instead of talking about the actual issue, you make it about something universal. This is about God. This is about country. This is about freedom. This is about saving the children. This is about thoughts and prayers not actually doing something to fix the problem. Who's going to argue against God and country and saving the children? You can't. So they must be right. Last clip.
Fargo. So it's pretty clear that St. Mark's Lutheran Church is no longer a Christian church. So what is it now? Well, it's a transgenderist church, one of many. Transgenderism is this country's fastest growing religion. Like many faiths, its theology features a supernatural transfiguration, the moment a person is transmogrified from one sex to another. Converts to this faith abandon their old lives and embrace an entirely new sex. Former identities no longer exist. They're dead names. But here's one big difference. Transgenderists do not believe in the God of monotheism. They believe that they themselves are God with the power to control nature. And if you think about it, this should be a concern because it's a recipe for extremism.
The most effective way to get people to do what you want them to do is to instill fear in them. If you watch that clip again, you can see that Tucker Carlson uses words that are specifically designed to make you afraid of people like me. We think we're gods. We want to overthrow Christianity. We don't believe in the monotheistic God, which was beautifully phrased because that way it makes us offensive to Jews and Christians and Muslims all at the same time. So that was a nice turn of phrase. I liked that. We are so narcissistic, right, that we become a threat. We are extremists. Now, before I left the classroom, I started teaching a generation of kids who had not been born yet on 9/11. But I don't think the messages of 9/11 have faded from our memory just yet. And so when you say extremists, you're putting us in a category with people who would fly an airplane into a building and kill people for an ideal. There is no such transgender threat. And to say that we want to convert people in the way that Christianity does is blatantly false. I would not wish this life that I have lived on anybody, even the people I don't like. This life is too hard, and no one would choose it given the social constructs that we live in. But this rhetorical strategy, sorry for using the Latin, but divide and conquer. It's as old as time. Because not only do you separate the queers from the straights, but you separate the trans from the gay, lesbian, and bi. If you can make the trans people a big threat, our allies in the queer community are going to distance themselves from us, right? They don't want to lose all of the things that they've worked for, marriage equality, and the like, the ability to adopt kids, the ability to leave things to your partner, to your spouse. They don't want to lose that, and so they start looking askance at the trans people. Divide and conquer. So Cicero tells us that the goal of an argument is to win, and that rhetoric is the way to win. So my question is, why would you choose to appeal to bias, to reframe, i.e., to ignore the actual issue, to instill fear, to mock, to demonize? Why would you choose that? And the only answer I can come up with is that you have no case. These are the strategies that Cicero would use when he had no case, when his client was very clearly guilty and he just needed to tap dance long enough to get the jury to agree with him. These are strategies, and you need to be aware of them because that's what's happening in this cultural discussion. Oops, sorry. Um, this is what this is what I want you to be able to take back into your discussions. The fact that, wait, let's look at how they're framing their argument. Why are they framing their argument? Who is benefiting from looking at the issue that way? Because it's sure as heck not transgender people. And I would point out that it's not you. Thank you so much for listening. Let me bring Rachel back and let's open it up to questions.